Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching ninth and final part of What If Naruto Becomes Demonic Samurai. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
When Naruto, Fu, and Killer Bee returned to Kiri with Yagura, they were greeted by Shizuka, who was visibly concerned. But she wasn't worried for Naruto's safety when she gave him that look. No. There were two targets for this gaze. They asked, "Shizuka, what's the matter?" Even though he was terrified, Naruto said it calmly. "Just say, Kiba and Choji, even though Hinata and I gave it our all, we have no idea if they will make it through the night." As he frowned, Naruto glanced at the other Jinchuriki. "Go ahead and be a fool. We've got this handled," said Killer Bee solemnly. Since the others seemed to be gone, Naruto nodded and comforted a sobbing Shizuka before taking off for the area where the civilians had set up a makeshift hospital. As soon as they touched down, Naruto was flooded with memories of the Iron Country War. It was difficult to forget the faces of the people he had buried, killed, and injured. While Naruto comforted Shizuka, Hinata and Neji emerged from a nearby tent, and both of them let out audible gasps. "You're welcome to join us anytime, Naruto-san. Kiba and Choji don't have much time, so be quick." Even though it was only a short distance to the tent of the two Konoha, the agony felt by all increased as time dragged on. Once inside the tent, Naruto's eyes welled up with tears and he averted them in shame. "If only I hadn't agreed to fight when they asked me to." After waiting for a while, Naruto worked up the nerve to check on Kiba and Choji. He desperately wished he could close his eyes. Kiba had lost his left arm at the shoulder and was covered in cuts and bruises. A scar extended from the site of the cut through his right eye and onto the bridge of his nose. Plus, that doesn't account for the internal bleeding. Similarly to Kiba, Choji had his left arm amputated at the shoulder, but his wounds appeared far more severe. His entire body was riddled with puncture wounds, some of which were perilously close to his heart. Naruto winced at one in particular because he knew that even if Choji survived, he would never walk again. "We need to know, who did this?" Naruto's eyes welled up with tears and he mumbled something. "It's Obito, Naruto. And he even had my former partner in crime." As Orochimaru walked somberly into the tent, he sighed. "When the explosives went off early, Kiba, Choji, and I were leading a small group of rebels toward the front gate. We were down to the last 3 people on Earth. Naruto, I'm so sorry I couldn't save them." The named individual observed the Sennin, who was using crutches and nursing a few cuts and bruises. He probably made it through the battle thanks to his snake-like qualities. Here it was, Naruto sighed. "You're in the clear, Orochimaru. The responsibility for carrying the torch belongs to me. I, not you, gave them permission to fight." After wiping away her tears, Shizuka slapped Naruto across the face, shocking everyone present, including the usually unsurprised Hinata, Neji, and Orochimaru. "Shizuka? Do not put us through this again, sir. Kiba and Choji, like the assassin in Iron Country, are war casualties." "Assault, Naruto. Isn't it obvious that another one is right around the corner from you?" Saddened, Naruto lowered his head. He did, in fact, sense the winds of change in the oncoming storm. Nothing more, nothing less than a relaxing trip with the love of his life was what he desired. But the war always followed Naruto, and his friends died along with them. Naruto finally spoke again after a prolonged silence. His demeanor and tone were more solemn than before. "Orochimaru, Obito was so powerful. I fought him once before, and I knew he was just playing with me, but that was the last time. Without any hesitance, at least Sensei's level when he was at his strongest, but he has room to grow. Perhaps a power comparable to Madara's." When asked, "Did you wound him at all, did you find any weaknesses?" Sighing, Orochimaru shook his head sadly. "Yes, if being easily angered is considered a weakness, but in terms of technique as a whole? I gave it my all and still couldn't even come close to the man." The possibility of obtaining the legendary Rinnegan with the aid of Hashirama's would release an eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The Sennin didn't elaborate further, but for Naruto, that was sufficient. "Naruto-kun," Shizuka said in a subdued voice, and he paid attention. "You and I are nowhere near that caliber, and if he wants to use one of us to reach the other, he'll have to use both of us." The Uzumaki smirked and planted a kiss on Shizuka's head. I know, my fair maiden, and that's why I propose we use the time we have to prepare for when it comes. Join the salamanders and hone your skills. For my part, I have to go back in time and follow in people's tracks. Before anyone else could speak, Hinata, who had been watching over Choji and Kiba the entire time, yelled that Kiba had come out of his coma, albeit briefly. Kiba twisted his head, hurt as he was, to look at Naruto. He waved with his good arm for you to come over and listen to him out. Naruto, his eyes welling up again, did as he was told. To quote Akamaru, "Take her back to my mom, and tell her that I loved her." Kiba sputtered and paused for a bloody cough. His breaths became more ragged and rapid. The message reads, do not blame why yourself. Tell my friends to remember my sacrifice and to never forget me. Kiba's face lit up with a grin despite the fact that he coughed up more blood. Your honor as a samurai demands that your last words be shared with the world. Added something? In pain and aware that his time was running out, Kiba could only make a head nod at Choji. What he meant was clear to Naruto and the others. Wheeling the Akamichi over to the Inuzuka allowed them to shake hands. Choji eventually came to and woke up after Naruto assisted them. Kiba and Choji, best friends since before they were born, shared a final smile and farewell. We're gonna be eternal besties, right? Kiba said, tightening his grip on Choji's hand. Why yeah, eternal besties. Hopefully there are some eating competitions in the clouds. Before Kiba responded, the two of them shared a wry, hurtful laugh. To which the other responds, you and me be both, pal. With those words, Kiba and Choji left this world forever. As a member of the Konoha 12, Neji's heart sank when he saw two of his friends treat death with such indifference. As Hinata knelt beside her cousin in grief, Naruto, Shizuka, and Orochimaru went off to grieve alone. The question, Yuto? Yuka, okay. Yuki announced her presence, her blood-spattered fur announcing her arrival. Eventually, Yuki, we'll get there. Frowning, Shizuka looked at Naruto and planted a kiss on his cheek. Leave, I can sense when you need some time alone. Get on your way, the future household can wait. In response, Naruto nodded and kissed her on the lips. They laughed and then parted ways with friendly smiles. Yuki was torn between two potential partners. The feelings she picked up on suggested that both needed assistance, but she was left wondering which one. Shizuka looked at the Arctic fox and scratched her ears as if she could read Yuki's mind. My future husband, Yuki, needs a friend like you to get through this tough time. Fox showed his comprehension by nodding and yipping. The words, Yuki go, Yuka be safe, were yelled out. That's great, Yuki. After losing sight of the Arctic fox, Shizuka bit her thumb and called upon her former salamander, Aoi. To paraphrase, hey Shizuka, is it that time already? After a moment, Shizuka confirmed, hi, the fourth Shinobi War is upon us. With full comprehension of the gravity of the situation, Aoi nodded. Both disappeared in a cloud of smoke shortly after, leaving Orochimaru all alone. Maybe it's time for the Sannin to heal and reunite. The snake Sennin reasoned thus, and set off to retrieve Akamaru before searching for Naruto. Before leaving, Orochimaru already had his return to Konoha planned out. Through Naruto. With a lighted cigarette in his mouth, Naruto sighed as he sat on a rooftop and viewed the ocean below. He finally grasped what his master had meant when he said the prophecy would shift and how much pain he would have to go through. Kit, if you want to have a chat. Kurama said downcastly, his ears hanging low. I get it, Kurama, but after everything I've been through, what's one more rock added to the rippling pond? Naruto shook his head mentally and said. It's a ripple that I'm supposed to stop, and it seems to have begun with my birth in Obito. A grin spread across the Biju's face as he said, just like Fukui. No wonder he saw you as his son. As Naruto exhaled the smoke from his lungs, he too smiled a little. After placing the cancer stick back in his mouth, he removed a scroll from his kimono, which had been given to him by Kisame. He recalled the first time he read the contents as he unrolled the parchment, which looked like it had been around for centuries. The answer to the puzzle was inside, along with a revelation about a unique accomplishment for Naruto. It was a total fluke that he managed to join together two distinct forms of ki. To figure out his next step after leaving Konoha, Naruto reread the riddle. One must travel through the mountains if they wish to retrieve additional scrolls. A cave can be found on the highest peak, close to a small creek, where the chosen one is expected to go. That's a very intriguing Gaki. Naruto nodded his head in agreement as Zabuza cut in. Where exactly these scrolls will lead me is anyone's guess, but I did see this creek when I fought Onoki. The two were silent for a moment as Naruto rolled up the scroll and stowed it away. Zabuza caught the sigh that escaped his lips as he reflected on Kiba and Choji, and with a wistful smile, he patted Naruto on the back. It's a shame their careers were cut short because both were exceptional shinobi. Had the makings of a mythic figure. The appeal of Naruto's cigarette had suddenly diminished. He flipped it away with a groan of disgust and kept staring at the water as he spoke. Everyone in Kiri is in mourning, and their sacrifice will not be forgotten. It was like feeling my master's key signature again. When the silence had passed, Naruto shifted gears. Have any suggestions for a new Mizukage? Zabuza was annoyed by the sudden shift in conversation, but he could see why it had occurred. I'm not ready to be Gaki just yet, but I think Mei could help. She has led these rebels for years, through good times and bad, despite her sometimes fiery personality. But then, we have you as well. Naruto smiled slightly as he shook his head. You should know by now that it's impossible for me to become a Kage because I'm a samurai, Zabuza. What I mean to ask is, but, isn't Konoha your home? The grin on Naruto's face widened. Although I was born there, it is not the place where my heart belongs or where I envision myself raising a family and eventually serving as a leader. Ironic homeland. Zabuza smiled and nodded before taking an item from his sleeve and handing it to Naruto. When the Uzumaki realized it was another ancient scroll, their eyes widened. The swordsman spoke for Naruto before he could. Years ago, on a routine mission to the area, I stumbled upon the cave predicted by that riddle. A pedestal with the scroll on it was about all that was there. Zabuza indicated the scroll with a point and a shrug. Never got around to opening it. The scroll seemed to be telling me to hold off until the right time, or the right person. Naruto, holding his breath, carefully unrolled the scroll. His and Zabuza's eyes widened when they were fully opened. It wasn't a puzzle, but rather a map pointing to the location of the next scroll. Of course. It's all starting to click now. Masamune, what are you keeping from us? As Naruto pondered. Gaki. Zabuza spoke up, worry evident in his tone. A lot of people have tried to get to that island, but they keep getting caught in those. I get it, Zabuza. But the red blood cells in my body should get me through. As he rolled the scroll back up, Naruto cut him off abruptly. Anything else they were going to say was cut short by a bark and a cry of Yuto. Zabuza and Naruto turned to see Orochimaru carrying a bandaged Akamaru, followed by Yuki. Time to leave. However, he showed his appreciation to Zabuza with a bow before Naruto did. Demon of the Bloody Mist, it was good to talk to you again. Maybe one day our lives will cross again. Zabuza bowed back before speaking. To have fought beside you, Akuma no Senshi, was a privilege. Kiri will be eternally grateful to you. Naruto said one last thing as he and Yuki and Orochimaru walked away. Don't worry about yourself or Yugura. They'll be fine. Please convey my regrets to Mei for missing her coronation. It was my pleasure once more. We will miss you, Zabuza-san. The seven swordsmen laughed to himself in his mind. I'll never understand how he can see into the future like that. The combination of Killer Bee and Fu. Killer Bee and Fu hid out in a building that had been partially destroyed, waiting for Yugura to awaken. The former Mizukage has been disarmed and is currently bound to a support beam. After recalling the atrocities he was coerced to commit, Yugura became a suicidal risk. Bee and Fu's expressions darkened with sadness as they noticed the first memory flash or twitch of a facial muscle. Yugura lay in bed for a while, but eventually one memory became too gruesome to revisit. The Mizukage cried out, "No!" and then threw up on the hardwood floor. After he stopped throwing up, he continued, "I didn't kill that child, I didn't kill that child," while still sobbing. Although tensions rose when Yugura attempted to free himself from his restraints, Killer Bee and Fu allowed him to continue. The sobbing eventually subsided, and Yugura looked up at them both, an empty look on his face. Saying, "Just kill me, please, let Isobu reform so that he could live in peace." Without lifting her frown, Fu shook her head and said, "No can do, Yugura. The one that controlled you now has two of our own, one of which is responsible for destroying Kumo. Yugura's eyes widened in surprise as he uttered, what? As the other Jinchuriki nodded in agreement, Killer Bee recounted the conflict that had previously destroyed Iwa and how Obito had placed Onoki under a genjutsu in order to do so. In addition, he informed Yugura that Naruto had been seriously injured during the conflict. And there are some details about his involvement in the Iron Country that are just as interesting. All the Jinchuriki were getting together, Killer Bee said, to put an end to Obito and his warped plan to make the world at peace. It seemed to stimulate Yugura's brain and take his mind off of suicidal thoughts. Inquiringly, Isobu, you awake? The Biju woke up from his nap with a groan. What do you want, and do it quickly, because here I am now, you obnoxious brat. Before he spoke, Yugura mentally let out a sigh. As much as I want to die and let you go free, the idea of us Jinchuriki banding together and ending the man who did this to us sounds fun. See, can you help suppress what Obito did? With a downcast expression, Isobu said, I can, little one, but it will take time. Thank you, Isobu. Anytime, but remember your friends will help speed up your recovery. Now go away, my nap is calling. As soon as Killer Bee saw Yugura come to, he broke into his customary rap smile. I know you consulted Isobu. Good luck with your suicide pact. Shortly after, Fu delivered a smack. The phrase, not helping B. Yugura's short chuckle took him by surprise, and he quickly covered his mouth. Is this what it's like to have people who care about you? I haven't laughed in so long. It feels wonderful. Intruding on their conversation, Naruto said, I knew I sensed your signatures in here, and... Oh, hello Yugura, finally awake I see. The former Mizukage's appearance brought a broad grin to Naruto's face. Slowly, Yuki approached Yugura to take a sniff. The Arctic fox quickly became the source of much mirth when it licked the Jinchuriki on the face. Okay, Yuto. You're welcome, Yuki, but I already knew he posed no danger to us. After Yugura gave the fox the thumbs up, it gnawed off the bindings so that he could stand up and stretch. After working out the kinks, he turned to Naruto and began to cry again. These were not tears of sorrow, but of unbridled happiness. The elation of being set free. As Yugura hugged him and thanked him repeatedly, Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. Naruto's expression changed quickly as he comforted the other Jinchuriki. Fear not for your life, as you have family now whom will go to the ends of the elemental nations just to ensure your safety. Fear not for Obito, as we will free our brother and sister from his grasp and come together as one to end that which is the embodiment of evil. As he pushed Yugura back, Naruto paused and smiled down at him. To prepare for the common enemy that awaits us, follow B and Fu, go to Iwa and meet your new family. Train, to your heart's content. Train so that we will be ready to face the common enemy that stands before us. After wiping away his tears, Yugura returned the grin. Emotions were still too high for him to speak, but a nod of the head was all that was required by Naruto. Someone bent down and scratched behind Yuki's ears as they looked at her pityingly. Come on Yuki, we have to go back to Konoha and bury these two people like heroes. Naruto closed his eyes in sadness as Fu and B gasped in shock and Yugura raised an eyebrow in bewilderment. A cigarette was pulled from a sleeve in his kimono and lit with fire key before he spoke. He lit up and confirmed the worst fears of Killer B and Fu by exhaling the smoke. Yes, B, Fu, I had to break two mothers' hearts. And Yugura, Obito was the one who did the deed. Use this incentive not for revenge, but to find the strength which lies in your heart. With that, Naruto took another drag from his cancer stick and gestured for the others to follow. Get here, Yuki. Yugura, still furious at what Obito had done, clenched his fists as Naruto and the Arctic Fox walked away. His final thoughts before committing suicide involved brutally murdering the Uchiha and then urinating on his mutilated body. 1 week later, Obito, the secret base. The Uchiha paced back and forth, his mind racing with potential strategies. Perhaps now was the time to strike, but Zetsu had just returned with some unsettling news, so he wasn't sure. The remaining Jinchuriki were on their way to Iwa to join the ones Yugura had left behind, and he was still alive. The return of Naruto, Orochimaru, and the Hyuga to Konoha. Shizuka's disappearance with no word on where she may be. Mei's promotion to Mizukage. All of these things and more. However, it wasn't all bad news. Kakuzu and the others succeeded in eradicating the villages of Hidden Frost, Hidden Hot Springs, and 5 others. He diverted Yugito and Utakata's attention from the small villages they were sacking to something much more substantial. Area of the sky. Zetsu told Obito that they had amassed enough Zero Tails power for another attack. The Uchiha desired to add this ability to his repertoire. With Sky Country's technology in my hands, the world will learn to bow at my feet. Yes, peace achieved through absolute fear. He paused, remembering the two people he had killed. Kiba and Choji's deaths, in retrospect, will only make Konoha train harder, which will make Nagato harder to get to. Maybe Zetsu can help me out of this jam. Gates to Konoha. When Naruto, Yuki, and Orochimaru had finished with Killer Bee and the others, they returned to check on Neji and Hinata. The Hyuga assisted in placing the bodies of Kiba and Choji inside two of Shizuka's special storage scrolls, a process that took 10 minutes due to the length of their farewells. They were applauded as they left by both rebels and regular citizens of Kiri. To the contrary, they politely declined all gifts that were offered. Mei's management of the reconstruction process kept them from meeting, but Naruto had faith that Zabuza would relay their message to her. They knew they had a long journey ahead of them once they left the village gates and boarded the boat to the mainland. A week later, upon their arrival at the city gates of Konoha, Azumo and Kotetsu immediately sensed that something was wrong. First, Akamaru didn't have Kiba, and second, only the Hyuga family made it back from the mission. They both hoped for the best as they checked papers and waved everyone through. Once the gate guards were out of earshot, Naruto said in a defeated tone, "Take the scrolls to my cousin and give your reports. I'll be the one to inform Sume and Choji's mom. Can we tell the others about this?" Neji asked, fighting back tears. Naruto nodded thoughtfully after a moment. "Just as I told Yugura, let their deaths fuel your determination to vanquish our enemy and ensure their legacy of service is not forgotten." Here is where Akamaru was given to Naruto before the group dispersed. As the heirs to their respective clans, you can imagine how devastated these families must feel. "I get it, Kurama, and I appreciate your comfort on the way home. All the fighting I've done has a way of bringing up painful memories." The Biju laughed as he stretched and emerged from his cave, only to scratch himself while brushing up against a tree. Kurama snickered to himself as Naruto perspired and said, "Ah. That's the spot. I'll try to hide the people you don't want to see again from you, but there's only so much I can do." When Naruto arrived at the Inuzuka compound, he nodded and severed the connection. One of the guards yelled, "State your business," while the other punched him in the shoulder. In order to shock the two guards, Naruto simply held up a bandaged Akamaru. Eyes that quickly took a keen interest in the floor. They recognized the significance of Naruto's action and welcomed him inside. Sume was singing to herself as she prepared one of Kiba's favorite meals. She had a hunch he would return from his mission today and be in search of solace. She had no idea that the day would turn from one of joy to one of sorrow. She was stirring the potatoes when the doorbell rang. Sume walked to the door and called out, "Who is it?" "Hello, Sume-san, my name is Naruto. May I come in?" She welcomed the son of Minato and Kushina inside with a grin on her face. However, it faded when they discovered Akamaru was hurt and Kiba was nowhere to be found. She muttered, "Kiba never leaves Akamaru behind. If not, please reassure me that my little boy is fine." Her eyes were opened wide when the realization was accompanied by a whimper for said Ninken. Naruto said sadly, "I'm sorry Sume, but your son was killed in the line of duty." This caused the clan leader to collapse to her knees and begin crying. He helped Sume find a seat at the table, then went to see how things were cooking. He turned off the stove after checking on the potatoes and sat down opposite the clan chief. Sume sputtered, Who else?" through choking sobs. "I have no doubt that Kiba wasn't on his lonesome." Naruto sighed. His single-word response only made the clan leader cry harder. "Choji." Sume's face was filled with unfathomable sorrow as she dried her tears after a few minutes. She took a deep breath and continued, "I even made Kiba's favorite meal thinking he would be home today, but I never expected this." "How fast was that?" Naruto smiled slightly and explained to Sume what Kiba had told him about the final moments he and Choji spent together. The Inuzuka showed a hint of happiness as a result. "I really think it would be good for me if I could come with you to the Akamichi compound." To help Sume stand, Naruto merely got to his feet. They started walking toward the Akamichi compound in silence. Hokage's chambers. When Nagato looked at the two scrolls in front of him, he couldn't help but frown. Knowing that Obito was responsible for the news only made it more devastating. Orochimaru was left alone in the office after the Hyuga had presented their report and been sent home. Soon after, Nagato summoned Hiruzen and the other two Sannin. They were informed of Kiba and Choji's deaths once they arrived. The office was filled with grief, but there was also a hint of anger at the realization of who was responsible. Following an uncomfortable pause, Nagato finally spoke, his tone firm and offering little room for discussion. I have already sent out a missive to the spared nations, including Iron Country, about what to do with this threat, and in it I brought up the possibility of doing something that hasn't been done in many years. With wide eyes, Hiruzen cut in, a cage summit. The Godem looked out toward the Hokage monument and nodded. To my astonishment, everyone seems to agree with you, Sandame Dono. Tsunade's question, and what of Kumo and the just liberated Kiri? Shouldn't those cages be involved as well? Caused Nagato to hum thoughtfully. Yes, I guess that could happen, but we all know how feeble those villages are right now, and that doesn't mean we can have them join forces with another. Hiruzen closed his eyes and mentally regressed to the time of the warring clans. There, a recollection of how a weaker clan or a clan that was split in two had managed to wipe out a stronger one surfaced. When the Sandames smiled, the Sannin felt a chill run up their spines. There was an internal chorus of, oh no, there's that smile again. Hiruzen put his pipe to his lips and asked, Nagato-san, have I ever told you about how some major clans became extinct back when I was growing up? The Sannin finished with an internal chuckle. And there's the pipe. Yep, the professor is back. Nagato warned with a narrowing of his Rinnegan eyes, no, I don't believe I have, but if it is just meaningless to our current situation then I won't hesitate to kick you out. Hiruzen has seen so much evil in his 3 lifetimes that he can only laugh it off. Please allow me to explain. It's time well spent. The Uzumaki gave an indifferent grunt of agreement. To paraphrase, you may. With his eyes closed, a grin on his face, and a pipe in his mouth, Hiruzen reminisced about the time a group of dispersed, smaller clans banded together to defeat a unified, powerful larger clan. Most of these alliances remained intact after a major enemy was vanquished, but some did dissolve. After concluding his story, the professor bravely opened his eyes and stared into the Rinnegan. When referring to the elemental nations, the speaker said, don't you see Nagato-san, all of us must come together as one to fight this common foe. The elemental nations are weak and divided, and this cage summit could very well be a place where all past conflicts can be cast aside and where we as a nation finally becomes whole. A toad belonging to Jiraiya appeared in Nagato's office before he could reply. The anxious expression on the toad's face put everyone on edge. Jiraiya asked, what do you have to report? Out of concern that another major village had been obliterated. Someone reported seeing Yu-Gi-Oh and Utakata leave a port in Lightning Country and possibly heading towards Sky Country. This made people take a second look. Jiraiya was perplexed as to why Obito would have them visit a place where they had been previously defeated. With a shrug, the toad replied, Dunno, though rumors have sprouted of unusual activity in those parts. Do you wish for me to go there, Jiraiya-san? The one to respond was Nagato. Obito must be onto something if he's using controlled Jinchuriki, right? The toad sage signaled to his summon, and it quickly vanished. Nagato sighed and went on. I will talk to my cousin about what to do with the samurai in training here, though from what I can tell, none will be ready to face such a foe, but in the meantime, I want all of you, all of Konoha, to step up training in preparation for the Cage Summit, which will be in a year and a half. The Sannin and Hiruzen nodded firmly in agreement with Nagato's decisions. They were all let go soon after that. However, once outside the office, Hiruzen halted his class. I think we need to get back together as a team, so let's have practice at my house. The 3 Sannin stared in disbelief at their sensei. Tsunade stammered, but, your age, your heart condition. In response, a light chuckle escaped the god of Shinobi before he spoke. There is a brief pause before she continues, Tsunade, always watching out for my well-being, even when you were but a genin. No need to worry about my aging body. I've already lived through 3 wars, and what's one more to add to my list of accomplishments? Even at almost 73 years of age, the prospect of battle still excites you, sensei. Ku, always one to stare death in the face. Hiruzen's response made the Sannin chuckle, ha. I'd like to see anyone try to keep this geriatric goon down. Jiraiya smiled and patted his sensei on the shoulder once he'd collected himself. If you don't want to end up with a broken hip, it's time to get you back into peak performance, you old fool. Hiruzen laughed to himself as he avoided bringing his students to his private training ground. It looked like the next 18 months would be very exciting. Through Naruto. The burden lifted from his shoulders as he left the Akamichi compound. Sume and Choji's mother were both extremely grieving, but they were also both determined to help each other heal. "Kit, how are you doing?" Kurama inquired. "I feel like a huge burden has been taken off my shoulders." There was silence as Naruto made his way to the Samurai Academy to check in on his students. Along the way, he encountered the remaining members of the Konoha 12 at a memorial barbecue held at Akamichi. He looked over at the table where Kiba and Choji would have been sitting and saw 2 plates of hot barbecue waiting for them. Even though he only smiled briefly, Naruto stayed long enough for everyone to see him. Everyone returned Naruto's smile, and he left. Knowing that Shikamaru and the others required privacy, he gave them that. Naruto opened the door to his master's shop, walked straight to the back room, and collapsed onto the cot. Yuki followed shortly after, also letting out a mournful whimper. "Yuto okay?" Naruto laughed as he petted the Arctic fox and scratched behind its ears. Naruto drifted off to sleep to the sounds of his students fighting. A very long time coming. The heavens opened up and poured rain on Konoha, as if to show that even the gods were saddened by the deaths of Kiba and Choji. 2 budding shinobi who were just getting started. 2 men who were robbed of their young lives. The villagers gathered for the ceremony couldn't help but reflect on their Godime's devastating announcement the day before. The sudden change in everyone's aura triggered memories for Naruto of his master's death and funeral. Despite being slightly unnerved by Fukui's final request, Naruto had already accepted Fukui's choice. As the remaining members of the Konoha 12 made their way to the 2 coffins, Naruto, resplendent in his freshly polished and repaired armor, couldn't help but glance in their direction. He had some idea of the suffering they were experiencing right now and how long it would take for the wound to mend. Naruto sighed as the rain pounded his face and slowly approached the others. Ino smiled sadly as she regarded Choji's serene countenance. "Why?" Before leaving on his mission, Choji asked her out on a date. Ino accepted with a stutter and a blush that would have done old Hinata proud. It was the most unforgettable night of her life. Ino finally gave in and clung to Shikamaru, who was the closest to her. "Ino, don't bottle up your emotions. We're all here to listen." The rest of the Konoha 12 weren't doing much better, either. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't hold back the tears. The memories of the suicide mission that Danzo had sent him on all those years ago brought back painful emotions for Sai, and he shed silent tears for both Kiba and Choji. "A solemn hauntings of the past, Sai?" Naruto announced his presence, and the pale shinobi nodded. "When I first met Kiba and Choji, they introduced me to Lazy Shadow and the others, and I remember how close I came to dying when Danzo dispatched me to Iron Country. I never knew the joys of emotion until I met these people." Before speaking, Naruto sighed and patted Sai on the back softly. "The present is like a portal into the past. Time reverses and old wounds reopen," he said. Hiruzen introduced himself to Naruto with a small smile and the words, "Wise words you speak, my boy." Naruto smiled back. "I've had way too many encounters with the Shinigami to count, GG, and Master Harumasa taught me well, may his soul rest in peace." The rest of the Konoha 12 had already decided to join them before the Sandaime could even respond. At first, it seemed as though the silence would last forever, but eventually, the always jovial Lee broke it. "Despite how tragic the deaths of Kiba and Choji were, they have only served to fan the flames of youth that exist within each of us." Tenten smiled slightly as he replied, "A way to get stronger so the enemy doesn't stand a chance." As Nagato cleared his throat to get everyone's attention, he was met with silence. There would be a ceremony to remember Kiba and Choji, and it would be one that reignited the will of fire in everyone's souls. It wasn't until after the funeral that Naruto gave a scroll to Hinata. After noticing the bewildered expressions on the Hyuga brothers' faces, Naruto said, "Take this to Hiyashi-san, please." To paraphrase, I'm sure he will be pleased to know that what he and my master talked about all those years ago will come to fruition. The 2 people nodded, but they still refused to peek inside. But before he left, Neji extended an invitation to Naruto to join him for an Akamichi barbecue in honor of Kiba and Choji. Naruto replied with a grin on his face. "I appreciate the hospitality, but I must return to my past." It was unclear whose footsteps Neji and Hinata heard as they watched the Uzumaki turn and head for the gates. But as the rest of the Konoha 12 arrived, their minds quickly diverted. The smiling ghosts of Fukui and Takeshi would have materialized if they had stayed any longer. Both reveled in Naruto's success. Office in Tsuchikage, Iwa. As Kuretsuchi studied the 6 Jinchuriki before her, a bead of cold sweat trickled down her neck. She had an inkling as to why they were there and what might happen if she misspoke. Even though Kuretsuchi was considered a kage, he was no match for a team of 6 Jinchuriki. Kuretsuchi spoke up, despite her apprehension, because she had learned from Onoki's mistakes. What I mean is, am I to assume Naruto sent you here to see if I will pose a threat to his march towards peace? There was no verbal response, but her intuition was confirmed by their nonverbal cues. That's why she's grinning now. Do not think of me as another Onoki, I am far from that. After living with the geezer for so long, not to mention the nations now knowing his dirty secrets, I have come to realize his faults and helped Iwa become prosperous once again. I'm sure you've seen the improved buildings and the like. Han and Roshi narrowed their eyes at each other because Onoki was such an open wound for them. They had every right to be wary of his granddaughter. Gaara, on the other hand, had a wider perspective. Given that you have no known allies, I have to wonder where you are getting the money for all your projects. Are you mining for it? Shizuka leaned back in her chair and nodded thoughtfully. Incorrect. I prefer to reserve judgment on the other cages to determine whether or not they are worthy of the product we are producing before disclosing any further details. The office fell silent as the Jinchuriki processed this information. After some time, Gaara decided to put Kuretsuchi to the test on his knowledge of Kumo. While I applaud your foresight, I must ask if you were aware that 2 of our fellow Jinchuriki killed Kumo. Kuretsuchi's eyes widened in surprise as he asked, what? Gaara smirked as he decided to continue his assault. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Obito is the one controlling them, just like he did with your grandfather. That was the winning touch. Kuretsuchi slammed her earthen and enhanced fists on the desk, shattering it with an anger befitting that of Onoki the fence-sitter. If what you say is true. Kuretsuchi growled angrily. I will take pleasure in dismembering his body. Any further discussion was cut short by a knock on the office door. The Tsuchikage yelled, what now? The messenger entered the office nervously and said, Kurodashi-sama, the Raikage is here to speak with you. My question is, should I send him in? The Onoki Scion's grandchild rubbed her temples and groaned. She sighed and nodded her head in agreement. In a matter of seconds, a bulky wall of muscle barged into the cramped office. And had shown up. Naruto's Wave Nation. It took Naruto only about 6 hours to travel to Wave Country using his wind key. The massive bridge that joined the 2 continents was the first amazing thing he saw. The second was seeing the bustling, successful village. The ports of Wave Country were bustling with activity, with ships of all sizes coming and going. While the captains of the ships were speaking with the port's foreman, the dock workers and sailors were busy unloading or loading the cargo. There were occasional calls from newspaper boys asking for 5 ryo for a copy of the paper, and the shouts of people advertising in the town square. Naruto was almost overcome by the concentration of smells in this area. Among these are the aroma of baking bread, the taste of the sea, and the heat of a forge. When asked, 5 ryo for a paper, sir. Naruto smiled as he regarded the youngster below him. One that was returned by the kid after he discovered that Naruto had given him 100 ryo. To paraphrase, no paper kid, just take that to your family and use it well. The newsboy smiled and took the money before continuing to solicit business. Naruto was about to make another purchase for his trip when he unexpectedly ran into a familiar face. Tizuna. Greetings, Naruto-san. How are things at the Super Samurai Academy? The students are making good progress, but I worry that they will be unprepared for the impending war. Tizuna gave a frustrated grunt. Prices have dropped dramatically as a result of increased trade, so I knew I wasn't the only one who had noticed. Naruto's eyebrows went up in surprise, but he didn't ask any more questions. On the other hand, Yuki made her presence felt. Yuki, you're hungry. The bridge builder gave the Arctic Fox a WTF look before turning back to Naruto, prompting the latter to shake his head in amusement. You'll adjust in no time, so why don't you come window shopping with me? Tizuna nodded and fed Yuki some fish, which she devoured voraciously. If I may inquire, so, where to? When Naruto answered, he smirked because he knew his response would leave the bridge builder dumbfounded. Uzushiogakure, the homeland of my clan. The old man dropped his sake bottle on the cobblestone street, his mouth wide open in surprise. Kurama chimed in out of the blue, saying, I find his lack of speech amusing. This prompted a snort of amusement from Naruto. Sure, you would, Kurama. I wonder if my father's shrine still has the artifact he left there. The silence had now been returned to Naruto. Where would he find out the truth about his family? Where Hiashi works? The chief of the clan examined the scroll in his hands with apprehension. Even after hearing what Naruto had told Hinata, his anxiety remained unabated. He finally got around to opening the scroll and reading. To Hiashi. You must know by now that war is on the horizon and that the great villages will soon be abandoned. The loss of Kumo and many other small villages is just a precursor to what is to come, despite the fact that some villages are making a comeback. The atmosphere is oppressive and chilling like the hands of a Shinigami. I feel like I need to commit seppuku just to get away from it. If you disregard my emotions, the Hyuga family will perish. Strive diligently in your training, and above all make use of the twist Shizuka-chan has provided at the scroll's conclusion. You can count on the Hyuga family to support both the Uzumaki and the Harumasa. When the fighting stops, I hope you'll consider staying with me in Iron Country, where my Hyuga ancestors first settled. With warmest regards. Harumazu Uzumaki, son of Naruto Uzumaki. When Hiashi opened the package Shizuka had left for them, he couldn't help but crack a grin. That pleasant surprise was accompanied by a note that read, Release the bird captives. Kuretsuchi Khan, Iwa, office. Kuretsuchi recanted what the man had just told her, fingers steepled and chin propped on hands. Her eyes narrowed. To which I replied, So, you decided to set up a tent city outside our village borders with your survivors a day before you arrive here without my knowledge, and only now wish to join forces? The Raikage was unfazed by the Tsuchikage's dismissive tone. My grandfather would have said no, and we're getting ready for war, but I'm happy to have you inside our walls. My only question is, why didn't you tell me sooner? She laughed nervously and said, I was afraid you were like Onoki. The result was 6 Jinchuriki looking guilty. And yet, one of the physically strongest cages, cowered before this diminutive man with the enormous nose and explosive temper. Even Kurodashi, incredulous, scrunched up her face and blinked her eyes shut. To the Jinchuriki, I grant permission to train in and around the village. The more protection, the better off this village will be in the long run. Shores of Uzu, a Naruto story. Yuki and Naruto watched the enormous whirlpools that were only 30 yards in front of their tiny boat. Naruto prayed that his status as an Uzumaki would be enough to ensure his survival. However, things weren't helped by the abundance of debris lying around the island and in the water near the whirlpools. Tizuna had warned them about the perils of the island and how no one had been able to reach it since the village was destroyed in the Second War. They've all tried and failed. Because of this risk, Tizuna insisted on getting all of his purchases for free. Instead of giving in, Naruto paid everyone 3 times as much and ordered them to put the money to good use. The majority of the town assembled around the Uzumaki's small boat to watch them leave. Here, Naruto and Yuki observed the vortices before them. Can you say, ready, Yuki? As the saying goes, Yuki scared, Yudo no go. With a grin on his face, Naruto scratched the fox's ears. Unfortunately, Masamune's secrets can no longer remain hidden. Then, Naruto activated his wind key and propelled the boat forward. Yuki, terrified by the churning waters, covered her eyes with her paws and whimpered as they dove in. Multiple whispers began to overpower Naruto as the sea spray began to soak both of them to the bone and the waters attempted to capsize the craft. The Messiah has come back. Said no one ever, finally, the one to lay us to rest. And Uzumaki still exists, proving that our legacy will not be lost. We must ensure his safe passage and pay our respects to him. With his eyes closed and a grin on his face, Naruto took everything in. The sea eventually became more tranquil, and Yuki opened one eye to peek out from between her paws. When they ran ashore and Naruto opened his eyes, he saw nothing but devastation for miles in every direction. Naruto's eyes welled up as he saw the skeletal remains, pot marks in the soil from explosions, and distant ruins of Uzu. The Uzumaki's seals were extremely effective, and he now realized how brutal this battle was. As he and Yuki got off the boat, Naruto looked around at the wreckage outside the village and noticed some abandoned headbands belonging to the Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri, among others. An empty mask with some fading kanji. Naruto clenched his fists but restrained his rage as he asked, "Root, how far did Danzo's treachery go?" Kurama sighed and said, "I'm sorry, Kit. It's over, Kurama, but it makes me sad to think that I might have had a real family if this had been avoided." Yuki followed Naruto's gesture and entered Uzu, where he discovered the skeletons of his clan members, their headbands still tightly grasped in their skeletal hands. Without a second's hesitation, Naruto grabbed one and polished it to perfection. Naruto was unfazed by the fact that the cloth the metal was fastened to had nearly rotted away. He simply retrieved the armor repair kit from his pack and, with great honor, sewed the clan symbol over his heart. "There, now my clan members will always have a place in my heart. But now the hard task begins." After a sigh to collect himself, Naruto frowned as he looked at Yuki. "Come, we must bury these respected shinobi, friend and foe alike." It took until nightfall, but most of the bodies were buried near where they had crashed. But Naruto knew that Masamune had something hidden on this island, so he hesitated. He would concentrate on training for the time being and worry about the rest later. Naruto consulted the map on the ancient scroll, set out in the direction it pointed, and soon found himself near the island's opposite end, far from Uzu. There was a large mountain, and Naruto saw what appeared to be a cave-like indentation near its peak. He reflected on the time he discovered Masamune's house as he soared upward with Yuki in tow. It didn't take long to get to the cave, and when Naruto arrived, he was greeted by the same wolf that had attacked him in the Iron Country Mountains. It said, in a growl that was oddly comforting, "Hello, Chosen One. I'm sorry if our past interaction offended you." Masamune insisted I test the Chosen's resolve in the face of death. Wolf let out a snarling laugh because Naruto was speechless. "By the way, my name is Elune. Come, Chosen One, we have a lot to do in a short amount of time." Naruto nodded numbly, still not convinced that the wolf was a metaphor for Masamune's spirit. As they entered the cave and descended, however, Naruto finally spoke up. "I appreciate your training me so much, Elune, but if I may ask a favor, thank you." The wolf nodded, turned, and put a paw on a nearby wall. There was a flash of light, then the sound of stones colliding. A bedroom and some shelves of scrolls were revealed after another door opened. As Elune asked, "Your request, Chosen One?" She smiled inwardly at the look of surprise on Naruto's face. Yuki woke Naruto up with a playful bite to the left ankle, and the ninja scratched his head in embarrassment. "I was too distracted by the beauty before me to ask, excuse me, but could you also train Yuki?" Elune studied the fox for a moment before giving a slight nod of agreement. "Because she deserves it, Chosen One, I will do as you ask. Please refer to me as Naruto, and I appreciate it." Elune bowed in gratitude. "No, thank you, Naruto, for preserving Masamune's legacy. Although only a few of his students succeeded in making scrolls to lead you here, the rest succeeded in spreading his legacy through stories and teaching future samurai, probably the ones protecting your daimyos today." Naruto nodded and went over to one of the bookcases, where he took down a scroll that had caught his attention. He opened it and was immediately taken aback by the contents of the scroll. The key to mastering your ki was in your hands. After recovering from his ordeal, Naruto thought to himself, "I can finally master that move I used on Takeshi, the move Mifune forbade. The time I spend in training will make you regret making an enemy of me, Obito." At Shizuka's, several salamanders observed their summoner as she attempted the initial stage of sage arts training. Locating the various nature chakras in the world of summoning and making contact with them. Shizuka focused intently on a pool of poison by squinting her eyes. She didn't seem to mind the noxious green mist being carried around by the waterfall behind her. Shizuka may have developed some immunity after being exposed to Ibuse's poison for a week, during which he spat in her face and threw her into the very pool she had been using for her meditation. No, the salamanders also taught her their own form of taijutsu and ninjutsu during that first week. Many of which involved poisons and would benefit from Shizuka's wind affinity. Although still early on, the boss summon Ibuse recognized Shizuka's potential as greater than Hanzo's. The salamanders were all smiles as a soothing glow quickly enveloped the realm of summoning. Although Shizuka had taken the necessary steps, the transformation still hadn't taken place. The glow faded as suddenly as it had appeared, and Shizuka opened her eyes to a bright smile. Finally, tell me about that ibuse. Off to a roaring start, youngster. But you've got a lot of work ahead of you if you want to make it. As Shizuka emerged onto solid ground, she asked, more poison training? Before responding, Ibuse shook his head. His voice was the only one of its kind in the family. Perhaps later, hatchling, for a new task awaits you. Come, my personal armory awaits. Shizuka was perplexed by the boss's summon. To paraphrase, Ibuse-san, perhaps you are forgetting that I am proficient with the katana strapped to my back? Ibuse would have smiled if he could have. After all, that was a very astute inquiry. After a short pause, the salamander said, but a hatchling, and yet so wise to ask a question such as that. As the saying goes, the loss of your sword is like the loss of a limb. The advantage you had is now lost. As they continued walking, Ibuse left it at that, but Shizuka was left wondering what he had said. Until Shizuka walked into the armory and saw a certain weapon, she couldn't think of anything. Keisarima, also known as a kusarima. Shizuka, like a child at Christmas, eagerly grabbed the weapon and admired its aesthetics. A 3-foot chain with a tiny counterweight at one end was attached to a sickle. Like the counterweight, the chain had a shiny black-silver finish. However, the sickle was a sickening light green with red and black highlights and etchings of the salamander realm. The land was mountainous, and it was full of different kinds of caves where the salamanders could hide out. The landscape was crisscrossed by a network of rivers and streams, some of which flowed toward the poison pool where Shizuka had practiced her techniques. Dark clouds loomed overhead, giving off a poisonous odor and blocking out most of the sun. Shizuka bowed to the head salamander and said, I understand now. Thank you, Ibuse-san. The time to celebrate is not now, hatchling. Training awaits, so it's back to the pool for you. The thought of having to swim laps in the poison she had just been contemplating caused Shizuka some mental groaning. Being awakened in a hospital bed is the ultimate sign of progress. She took a deep breath as she approached the pool and jumped in. Konoha, Hokage's private training ground, the next day. Hiruzen smiled a shite-eating grin as he peered down at his 3 students. The great Sanin lay on the ground nearby, exhausted and covered in wounds. The Monkey King, Enma, was hiding nearby in one of the many trees on the grounds. He, too, could not help but laugh at the predicament in which Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Tsunade found themselves. Perhaps it is these young whippersnappers beneath my sandals who need the proper training and not I, as I have forgotten in my old age to mention that I have trained ever since Danzo tried to kill off the Uchiha and take the Hokage seat for himself. Tsunade got to her feet and repositioned her right shoulder. Her self-diagnosis and subsequent recovery allowed her to join the other 2. Tsunade said disdainfully as she healed Jiraiya and Orochimaru, I've always wondered how it felt to get hit by one of my own punches. Now I'm regretting showing you my technique all those years ago. Before responding, Hiruzen laughed briefly. Unfortunately for you, everyone is aware of your greatest strength, which is something a wise shinobi would never do. As he sat up, Jiraiya said, I feel like I just got caught at the hot springs. He was holding his head at the joint where the adamantite staff had been attached. Once the sicknesses had been cured, Hiruzen gestured for Enma to leave. After they left, the Sandame didn't stop. To put it bluntly, you've all plateaued in the shinobi arts, and this spar was meant to demonstrate that to my students. You may be strong together and individually, but the fact of the matter is almost everyone knows your techniques by now. The Sanin winced at the thought, but they acknowledged Hiruzen's accuracy. The harsh judgment continued after the man lit his pipe and took a puff. With another puff of his pipe, his tone softened as he reflected on the past. I honestly expected you to be at my level when I was in my prime by now, but then again I was the sole cause for all of you to go on a self-imposed exile. For those who have adapted, like I have, I saw it all. 3 wars, friends dying for petty political reasons, and clans wiped off the face of this great nation. Not many shinobi reach my age because they become over-complacent with their skills, much like you all have. Hiruzen was wiping his eyes when he was suddenly interrupted by Jiraiya. Sensei, we understand. Please don't elaborate and let the past remain in the past. Orochimaru nodded, a grin on his face because he already knew what Hiruzen was up to. As one member of the group put it, to have us reinvent ourselves in only a year and a half will be quite a chore. Tsunade and Jiraiya were both stunned into silence. That was obviously impossible, completely unrealistic. Unless the Toad and Slug Sage mumbled, shadow clones. The smile on Hiruzen's face was not a happy one. No. This one guaranteed a great deal of suffering. Orochimaru's grin faded abruptly. There's that grin again. Coo, shit. You thought you bitched and moaned when you were wee genin, huh? I barely showed you how sadistic of a teacher I could be back then, but now I think you were ready for how Hashirama-sensei trained me. Seeing the Sannin so weak, they backed down. Hiruzen's tales painted a vivid picture in everyone's mind of the rigors of their training. Shattered bones, depleted chakras, and so much exercise that you throw up are all possible outcomes. The results of that training were obvious to everyone, including Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru. Hiruzen chuckled to himself before getting to work. Always wondered how I looked like when Sensei gave that same speech. The ominous grin returned as he ordered, I want 100 laps around this village while adding chakra to your legs. Afterwards, you are to come back here and do 1,000 push-ups, sit-ups, crunches, and squats. And that's not all. If you aren't shrieking like a little genin by that time, I'm going to have you hop from tree branch to tree branch while I throw jutsu, shuriken, and kunai at you from the ground. Inhaling deeply, Jiraiya exhaled slowly. Ah ha ha, sensei, are you sure? The Toad Sage said that the only way to stop Hiruzen's killing intent was to feel its full force. So help me Kami, if you don't want to see my wrath, you'll do what I say. The Sandame's words could almost cause the Shinigami to second-guess themselves. An amused shinobi god watched as the Sannin disappeared in a cloud of dust. The Konoha 12. The Godem was currently training the new Konoha 10, and like Hiruzen, he was strict with them. Nagato wanted the Konoha 10 to reach the Sennin or Cage level before the Cage Summit began because he was aware of the threats to himself and Konoha. While they were all Junin, becoming one was no easy feat. The Konoha 10 were so dedicated to this task that they were willing to risk their lives to complete it. Even though yesterday's meal was eaten in silence to honor their two slain friends, the looks exchanged between diners said everything that needed to be said. Instead of going home to wallow in self-pity, they immediately headed to their favorite training ground for a full-scale war. The Anbu were dispatched to deal with the situation because of the chakra output. They tried to look away, but the spectacle of the next generation giving their all in tribute to Kiba and Shoji was too compelling. Two people were still standing as the sun set, but they looked like they were about to pass out at any moment. With tears streaming down their faces, Hinata and Neji stared at each other as they recalled the final moments of Kiba and Shoji's lives. Like the other members of the Konoha 10, they eventually ran towards each other in an attempt to end the fight with a single blow, but instead they both fainted. The Anbu picked them up and delivered them to their homes from here. The chieftains of the various tribes were initially taken aback by what had happened, but their dismay quickly gave way to tremendous pride. Hiruzen, Sai's new legal guardian, couldn't help but think back on Hashirama's predictions that Sai's offspring would be more powerful than their own. Under his current expressionless mask, Nagato allowed a small smile to appear. His decision to accept the position of sensei for the Konoha 10 was reaffirmed by the report he received that evening. He tore himself away from his thoughts and realized they had both worked out enough for the time being. Having enough chakra to outlast your opponents is the next step in becoming a shinobi the enemy will fear. That's enough, but like war, there will be no time to rest. Ending the conversation with a yawn, Shikamaru said, troublesome, but what will this chakra control exercise entail? Everyone became nervous at Nagato's sly grin. You'll have to make as many shadow duplicates as you can and balance a spinning kunai on your hands, but that's not all I have in store for you. I don't trust your reflexes. Sai muttered, lazy shadow just had to ask. As he and the others walked into the nearby woods. The Godem turned to Lee with a mental chuckle. Come, I wish to spar with you. Though you lack chakra, your taijutsu and tonfa skills are quite proficient. Lee agreed and used Naruto's advice to rein in his hyperactivity. Within seconds, he had collected himself and thrown away his weights. Lee landed a powerful punch in front of Nagato, but Nagato easily blocked it. The imitator of Might Guy beamed with satisfaction at having found an opponent worthy of his talents. After pausing to block a knee to his solar plexus, he continued, this boy will be a force to be reckoned with. That blocked punch actually stung a little. To which the other speakers responded, and now to send shadow clones of my own to the others. Land of the Sky. Yugito and Utakata have just disembarked and begun their journey ashore. One from the Anchor Vantian race. Sky Country's government operated out of this facility, and it also served as a massive superweapon driven by the Zero Tails. Getting here by boat was the easy part. Acquiring one of the flying machines these shinobi were rumored to use would be much more challenging. Because they expected the leader of Sky Country to send his shinobi down to greet them, Yugito and Utakata kept their senses sharp as they walked. Within the predicted 5 minutes, a group of 10 had descended upon the Jinchuriki, demanding an explanation for their presence. Without delay, Yugito and Utakata entered their level 1 state. The Sky Shinobi tried to defend themselves, but the control duo was too strong for them. Utakata asked expressionlessly, "Any idea how these work?" as he examined the flying device. Yugito shook her head at first, but after she infused it with chakra, she quickly changed her mind. The machine's propellers turned, and it began to rise off the ground. From his hiding spot, a toad observed the group as they tested out their flying machines in preparation for their journey to the city. Jiraiya is not going to like this, but I'm afraid the Jinchuriki can sense me if I go any further. As Yugito and Utakata flew higher and closer to the city, the summoning faded away. Shino, seated on the Anchor Vanshan's throne, did his best to wait patiently for word about the team he had dispatched. After 5 minutes of silence, his tolerance had worn thin, and he was becoming increasingly irritated. I've been waiting 2 minutes for that team to arrive with my report. After waiting for another 3 minutes, I was no longer able to remain seated. At this point, Shino was determined to find out what was holding them up. A nearby explosion, however, diverted his attention just as he was about to leave. Hearing the screams of his dying shinobi was the final straw. Shino roared out and prepared to draw the dark energy from the Zero Tails that were stored below, declaring, "When I get my hands on whomever dares enter my domain, they will know who is the true king around here." There was another explosion, this one much closer, and then 2 bodies fell to the ground next to Shino. Both of their faces were permanently marked with terror. As the king of Sky Country drew on the dark energy, his white hair turned black and spiky, and his features became younger and more muscular. As Utakata and Yugito entered Shino's domain, he burst into a fit of hysterical laughter. After another hearty chuckle, he charged the Jinchuriki, high on his newfound authority. The phrase, "I will eat your heart," was uttered. Even as Shino drew nearer, Yugito and Utakata remained immobile. At the precise moment he was about to strike, the man found himself encased in a bubble that was rapidly contracting. The bubble around Shino burst as he pulsed his dark power outward with a malicious grin. "With this kind of strength, you have no chance of beating me." The darkness wave pushed Utakata and Yugito back a few steps, but they stood firm. They started reciting a series of hand gestures in unison. "Our Lord blesses you. You are a peace offering our Lord requests." Here the hand signs concluded, leaving Shino gaping at the massive wall of water and fire that was sent his way. However, quickly gave way to the same arrogance he exhibited. "Play like a kid, you hear me? You're nothing but peons under my feet." Soon, the Zero Tails' protective arms encircled Shino. After the dust settled, the same arms came for Yugito and Utakata. Defending the Anchor Vantian was just the beginning of the battle. And Obito. Obito looked at the holograms of Deidara, Kakuzu, and Sasori for a moment before turning to Zetsu. Asking, "Has preparations begun on our army, Zetsu?" The plant man nodded, but his white side did all the talking. "It will take me about 6 months to get the army ready, so plan accordingly." Obito beamed with delight at how smoothly things were progressing. After a brief pause, the Uchiha addressed his subordinates, "Good, and with Yugito and Utakata hopefully returning within the week, we can finally make our move. How's the hunting in the village?" "That's right, Deidara showed everyone my art, yeah." With a sigh, Kakuzu spoke in his usual emotionless manner. "I'd love to get my hands on some nice bounties," which is what Blondie was getting at when she said, "What we need is a bigger target." While Obito was debating who to shoot, Deidara vented her frustrations about having blonde hair. Iwa was out of the question after Zetsu informed them that Kumo and some of the Jinchuriki had joined them. If he went after Kiri, it would be too close to Konoha and ruin his chances of capturing Nagato. Since Iwa was nearby, the same was true for Taki. Due to their alliance with Konoha, even Suna and Aim were able to leave. "Your request has been denied because it could compromise our next move, but you are free to do as you please so long as you avoid the major villages." The Deidara, Kakuzu, and Sasori were disappointed, but they followed orders and severed ties. The question on Obito's mind was, has Kabuto been healed? He questioned to Zetsu. No, but he will be in due time. The Uchiha didn't understand how at first, but he did eventually. If I can get my hands on the Rinnegan, I can bring back my newest pawn, and then the real fun can begin. Hokage Mansion, Konoha, at night. The sun had just set on Konoha, and everyone had returned home after a long day at the office or, in the case of the shinobi, a long day of rigorous training. In his hands, Nagato held a jar filled with a transparent liquid that preserved two objects for later use. The Uzumaki sighed as he rolled the jar into a scroll for safekeeping and thought, to think I would have to take this precaution. Forgive me, Shodai Hokage, if I fail to uphold this great village which you have founded, even though the shinobi under my rule grow stronger by the day. I may feel like Kami, but even the gods themselves have limits. Nagato frowned and sealed the scroll into his right arm. Afterwards, 6 months. After 6 months of training, everyone has surpassed their previous bests. Naruto had progressed halfway toward mastery of his ki by this point, having successfully fused together 2 separate ki types. Despite his success in combining them, a lot of work remained before the attacks were ready for use in combat. A scroll Naruto discovered revealed that the Hanjo could be strengthened by combining elements and used for various attacks. On top of that, Masamune was able to learn more about his Uzumaki ancestry and the methods he used to create his works of art. The earliest Uzumaki were taught the ways of the samurai by one of Masamune's students. A way of life that faded over time, but which was preserved in their skilled use of kenjutsu and their prioritization of family over cage responsibilities. Characteristics of honor include: initially taken aback, Naruto cracked a grin as he realized why, all those years ago, donning the samurai armor and picking up that katana felt so natural to him. Elune has trained Yuki in several different areas. Invisibility, command of the demonic chakra within her body, a taijutsu style centered on the use of the tails, and the ability to generate a variety of fire attacks. Elune was overjoyed at the two's progress and aware that Masamune was looking down on his successor from on high. It's safe to assume he'd feel the same way. I can't even begin to imagine what they'll be like after they finish their training if they've accomplished this much in 6 months. Shizuka's Sage Mode training was going so well that she was able to initiate the transformation and maintain it for around 10 minutes before she became too exhausted to continue. Similarly to how he admired Shizuka's taijutsu and ninjutsu, Ibuse found this to be impressive. The Kusarigama, on the other hand, had taken more time because it was so different from anything else she'd ever used. Shizuka initially reacted angrily, but her rage dissipated when she realized how much stronger she had become. She had been trying to hit Ibuse for 4 months without success until yesterday. The village was ideal in every way for all of Konoha. Some of the elderly villagers who saw Hashirama's administration in action may have felt like they'd gone back in time. The same welcoming vibe pervaded the room as before. This was the will of fire the Shodai Hokage had been preaching about. The shinobi had high morale because they were rapidly strengthening to the point where the majority of their forces were Anbu or Junin. Fewer than 10% were at the Genin or Chunin level. As their shadow doubles collaborated with Hiruzen, the Sannin returned to their summon realms. After completing sage training, they found that their progress had stalled. It had been a long time since they'd felt this powerful. A month into their training, the Sannin were dealt a blow when Hiruzen needed a heart and lung transplant. Thankfully, Nagato was able to create the required organs using creation of all things. Hiruzen joked that his youth had returned after a month of recovery and he resumed training. It's too bad his aging body disagreed. The Konoha 10 were all roughly at the Anbu level in terms of strength, and they trained together every day, so they were extremely close and knew each other's moves by heart. If a coordinated attack were necessary, their actions would speak louder than words. As a result of Iwa and the Jinchuriki's training efforts, the village was quickly restored to its original state. Similar to Konoha, the general mood was upbeat and positive. Kumo were even able to put their differences from the past behind them and live together peacefully. Around the same time, Kiri had nearly returned to normal, with only minor repairs and cleanup left to do. Mei knew that if the Fourth Shinobi War broke out, their low shinobi population would be a problem. It was the primary motivation for her to seek help from Iwa. Kuretsuchi was taken aback when the Raikage, Killer Bee, and Fu accompanied her on her visit. Following the discussion, an agreement was made by both parties. Kiri's shinobi population increased after a treaty with Kumo and Iwa led to the recruitment of new members. Kiri eventually forgave Iwa and Kumo, just as they had forgiven each other. A development that had some questioning the value of maintaining the village structure at all. And Obito. Now that everyone from the Akatsuki had returned to their secret base, Obito was beside himself with joy. Utakata and Yugito were able to secure the Anchor Vantian while causing only minor damage to the superweapon. With a single genjutsu, Obito was able to gain command of the Zero Tails. But it was becoming difficult to maintain order among three formidable shinobi. The Uchiha started getting headaches and worried that he might lose control during the operation. But Obito pushed those ideas aside as he scolded himself for his weakness. The Uchiha, now clad in a new uniform, declared, "1. The time has come, Akatsuki. By the end of today, all will know our true power. All will come to fear the new order. All will come to know me as supreme leader of this world. Today is the day we will thrust this nation into war once again, but it will be a war for peace." Obito paused to look at Zetsu, who confirmed with a nod that everything was ready to go. He removed his mask to reveal a grin and continued his talk. "Let's knock over the biggest domino in Konoha and move on." The day in Konoha was normal in every way. A faint sound of training could be heard in the air, and businesses were open for business as well as civilians and shinobi. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful and free from the turmoil of war, but Nagato and the shinobi knew better. They were well aware that their village would soon be targeted for destruction. Many seasoned shinobi, including the Konoha Ten, Hiruzen, and the Sannin, were confident in their training. Those who are still genin and chunin, who have never fought in a war, felt something for the first time on their first major mission that every aspiring shinobi eventually feels. Fear. A feeling like that would have to be put on the back burner as the village was suddenly awoken by the sound of alarms. Instead of total anarchy, the village ran like clockwork. The genin and chunin rounded up the civilians and began to lead them into the abandoned root tunnels, but the junin and above remained to protect the village Hashirama and Madara had built. 4 people in a local tea shop exchanged sad looks as the world continued to revolve around them. They were now participants in yet another war. Hiruzen stared into the cup he was drinking from, convinced he saw his sensei's smiling face there, and said, "And so the cycle continues." Tsunade, Orochimaru, and Jiraiya shut their eyes as they reflected on the 2 wars that had led to the dreaded names by which they were now known. A minute had passed in what felt like an eternity of silence between the 4, but was actually quite brief. Everyone in the classroom, including the Sandaime Hokage, got up and smiled at each other. After receiving a nod from the leader, Team Hiruzen exited the store and headed for the main gates, where they would demonstrate to the enemy why Konoha was considered the strongest of all villages in the elemental nations. From the relative safety of the Anchor Vantian, Obito witnessed the Zetsu armies advance on Konoha from outside the city. He would only step in at the appropriate moment. The Uchiha's M's whirled into existence before reverting to normal, and he said, "And thus my conquest begins. If you were alive today, Rin, I wonder if you'd be pleased with the person I've become." A second, much more severe headache developed before Obito could dwell on his past. The intensity of the pain was enough to force even the powerful Uchiha to the ground. Obito stood up once the pain subsided and was surprised to see that he was bleeding from the eyes, but he ignored this as his thoughts returned to the task at hand. To quote the character, "Once I succeed in destroying the biggest threat of them all, I can easily extract the Biju from my pets and my pain will be no more." But what Obito didn't realize was that the pain he was experiencing wasn't related to the stress on his Sharingan at all. Seiken asked his sister, "Matabi, did you break free yet?" Via radio. "No, but I was almost there. Another push ought to do it." Seiken beamed and said, "Good, but wait until my signal. I want to watch that scumbag's face when he realizes he no longer controls our hosts." Matabi returned the smile, though her mood quickly darkened as she considered the consequences of their actions for both of them. Seiken shared these feelings, and the 2 vowed to aid their hosts in their recovery however they could. Standing on the gate, the Konoha Ten and some of the Konoha forces surveyed the forest beyond in a single individual they have come to respect over the years. Godem Hokage Nagato Uzumaki. There, beyond the gate and close to the tree line, Nagato stood fearlessly as the oncoming army accelerated. Nagato and the nearby people would serve as the first line of defense, while others would be dispersed throughout the village to fight off aerial and ground attacks. The ground trembled, and voices from among the trees grew increasingly loud. Everyone on the gate braced themselves as best they could, knowing that today many would die, both friends and foes. The sound intensified, and suddenly, out of the trees, like a plague of locusts, a swarm of white plant-like humanoids descended. Nagato's lips curved into a small smile as the enemy approached, and a gentle glow emanated from his Rinnegan. At the end, Nagato yelled, "You will know Kami, you will know pain, and thus you will be humbled." Before he hurled his hands at the enemy and said two potent words. The words, Shinra Tensai. The people stationed at the gates were stunned to see the forest Hashirama had planted to defend Konoha suddenly destroyed along with the oncoming enemies. It wasn't over, though, as they themselves recognized. Like ants emerging from a nest, white Zetsu creatures suddenly appeared all over Konoha, intent on devouring anything that moved. Even though it was whispered, everyone on the gate heard Sai say, "May Kami bless us this day." The Sandaime, their eyes hard and expressionless, led the war cry that could be heard for miles around as Hiruzen quickly called upon Enma, who transformed into the Adamantite staff. To paraphrase the rallying cry of "For the will of fire" for Konoha. As Naruto. Naruto was currently exploring Uzu in search of an artifact left behind by the Sage of Six Paths, completely oblivious to the events unfolding in Konoha. To paraphrase, "Are you sure it's here, Kurama? I've been looking for hours?" The Biju understood what his host was getting at and, to be honest, he found it very irritating. "My memory is as good as a young kid's, and I'm old." With a sigh, Naruto turned to Yuki and asked, "Did you find anything yet?" "That's right, Yuki no find, Yuki keep searching." As he continued his search, Naruto turned to Kurama and asked, "So what exactly does this artifact do, Kurama?" The Biju snorted in amusement, but replied, "I wish I knew, Kit." To paraphrase what our father said, all father told us was that one of his visions prompted the creation of something for, and I quote, "the one to end all wars." As if he were muttering, Naruto said, "Great." To add to the intrigue, more mysteries. The search continued, but eventually Yuki let out a yip and began poking at what appeared to be a stone of an unusual color. Once Naruto could see a good portion of the stone, he concentrated his wind ki on it and made it float to his hands. The light blue stone wasn't much bigger than Naruto's palm, and it was covered in what appeared to be much older fuinjutsu. When Naruto realized what language the writing was in, he let out a loud exclamation of shock. Naruto scratched his chin thoughtfully and said, "The history book I read said this was a language known as runic. Can you make sense of this language, which is considered fuinjutsu today?" After 5 minutes of looking at the stone through Naruto's eyes, the fox was astounded at what it had revealed about the ancient language. Kurama's stern warning caught Naruto off guard. "Kit, whatever you do not let that fall into Obito's hands." The Uzumaki began tentatively, studying the stone in his hands. "What is this, exactly?" "Kit. That's our only hope." At Shizuka's. As Shizuka attempted to enter Sage Mode, peace once again pervaded the salamander's domain. Her skin turned a pale olive color, and gills appeared on the sides of her chin, unlike 6 months ago when she couldn't even begin the transformation. Her hands also changed, becoming riddled with tiny slits that occasionally opened and released a toxic purple cloud of neurotoxin. Her vision became as distorted and dark as Ibuse's had been. She could barely make out any details. Although this could be seen as a major drawback, Ibuse was instrumental in teaching Shizuka the chakra sonar technique and how to detect shifts in the air currents caused by other people's movement. After finishing her metamorphosis, Shizuka breathed out, creating more of the purple neurotoxin, and began practicing her taijutsu while standing in the poisonous pool. Shizuka punched, kicked, and even did some acrobatics, all while occasionally launching a jet of purple fog at her invisible foe. Sometimes she'd even roll forward and finish a mule kick by placing her hands in the poison pool. She finished off the attack by flipping backward and twisting in midair, aiming her poisonous saliva right at her foe's face. The salamanders, with Ibuse looking on, were understandably pleased with their newest summoner. Hanzo didn't make it this far with Sage Mode, and he eventually gave up on it because he was already producing toxins on his own. After 15 minutes of Shizuka's dancing around the pool, everyone started to feel tired. After 5 more minutes, Shizuka decided to abandon her transformation and Shuni shine back to shore, where she promptly collapsed to the ground, giggling hysterically. Her breath was labored as she pushed herself to a new personal best and declared, "A new record, Ibuse. And I believe I have discovered a means of resuming Sage Mode without experiencing exhaustion." Ibuse's ears perked up and he said, "Oh? Say it out loud. Do tell, hatchling." After a few moments of rest, Shizuka sat up and said, "Shadow clones." She explained that she would leave a few of them in order to collect Senjutsu chakra, and then, when the time was right, she would pop the clone in order to eliminate her fatigue and return to Sage mode. Ibuse gave the idea some thought, but his first reaction was one of worry. Hatchling, if you consume too much Senjutsu chakra, you will end up looking like those salamander statues that adorn the pool. With a nod, Shizuka said, "Hi, which is why I will take the rest of the year to figure out how much I can take." If Ibuse had been able to smile, he would have. "You're a hatchling with a lot of wisdom, Shizuka." When he looked down to inquire about Shizuka's Kusarigama practice, he found her sound asleep. Ibuse sighed and started the walk back to his cave, mouthfully picking up his summoner. "Have a good night's rest, baby." To return to Konoha. Up in Deidara's huge clay bird, the 3 remaining Akatsuki members watched the Shinobi of Konoha fight the White Zetsu for survival. The former Iwa Nin said, "They look like ants, yeah." To quote one of my favorite bands, "Ants that deserve to be blasted away by my art." Before jumping from the bird and calling upon their respective allies, Kakuzu and Sasori gave their comrade, the term being used loosely, an uninterested stare. The Sandame Cage's puppet in Sasori's eyes. 4 of Kakuzu's 5 hearts are representing the elements of wind, water, fire, and lightning were involved. Deidara, frustrated by the lack of attention, stuffed his hands into the clay pouches so that the mouths on his hands could do their thing. To which the artist replied, "Fear my art, yeah." The mad bomber then pulled his hands from the pouches and released a flock of explosive pigeons. Those with a strong connection to the planet worked quickly to erect a dome over the area of Konoha that would be hit by the explosive birds. The massive dome was buckled and cracked by the explosions, but everyone inside survived. The remaining 3 Akatsuki members expected the exterior to collapse, but instead it sprouted spikes. Ones that many Konoha shinobi would soon be firing at them with great breakthrough. Sasori was undeterred, and she used the Sandame Cage's iron sand to build a wall in the air to defend them. The earth spikes disintegrated upon impact with the wall, just as they had when Kakuzu launched them into the air with his creatures. As the counterattack fizzled, Deidara flew his huge clay bird straight for the cage monument, hoping to smash the source of the shinobi of Konoha's last shred of optimism and destroy it. Things did not work out for him the way he had hoped. With a shrug and a smug grin on his face, Nagato's Asurapath, who had been tasked with keeping watch over the area, turned one of his arms into a flamethrower and let Deidara have it. To which the speaker responds, "Oh shit, yeah." Alongside Nagato and others. When the Godem saw the Akatsuki member explode, he smiled, but his grin quickly turned to a frown when he realized the bastard was still alive. He ignored the distractions around him and began dispatching the White Zetsu with ease, secure in the knowledge that his Asura path would lead him to victory. As Shikamaru linked his shadow to several Zetsu, he remarked, "This is much too easy. I would describe it as troubling." When Shikamaru released his technique, Shino swarmed the targets and gave a thumbs up. Soon after, a water bullet whizzed past his head, obliterating a Zetsu that had been sneaking up behind him. It only took a nod from him to Hinata to express his gratitude. Tenten grabbed one of her scrolls and threw it into the air as the enemy continued to advance, and the Konoha 10 watched from a safe distance. Hiruzen, anticipating the danger posed by Tenten's twin rising dragons, used his staff to deflect a white Zetsu before erecting a protective earthen dome around the Konoha 10. The Zetsu had no chance against the barrage of weapons that had descended upon them, but this was where a new foe decided to make an appearance. Yugito, still under Toba's control, appeared just as the earthen dome began to fade, landed a hard haymaker on Tenten's left cheek, and then turned her attention to the foes in front of her. Yugito didn't help matters by rushing into her version 1 cloak and charging headfirst into the enemy. With a simple nod, the Konoha 10 immediately got to work. Hinata went first, unleashing a massive water dragon, which was met by a mouse hairball from Yugito, while Ino tended to a wounded Tenten. Shino released his bugs as steam covered the area, while Shikamaru cast a longer shadow to try and corner the Jinchuriki. Sakura, Lee, and Neji saw Yugito about to make a move as Sai finished up the ceiling tag. As soon as the first 2 gates were unlocked, Lee sprinted forward to meet the Jinchuriki, who he promptly kicked twice in the chin. When they were in the air together, Lee unwrapped his bandages, wished for them to wrap around Yugito, and then he and Yugito began to spin in the opposite direction. The primary lotus was finished with a bang and a cloud of dust being kicked up in its wake. Sakura rushed in with her chakra scalpels after seeing Lee leap away from the epicenter, and Neji followed suit with the taijutsu of his clan. They acted as mere deterrents, knowing full well the corrosive nature of the chakra, and allowing Shikamaru and Shino to do their thing. While dodging the two attacking her, Yugito, who had been relatively unscathed by the primary lotus, was nearly connected to Shikamaru's shadow before Utakata caught the shadow user in his drowning bubble technique. The Nara, who had substituted a log for himself, appeared near Sai, disappeared into the darkness, and then reappeared behind Utakata to deliver a solid kick to the center of his back. After realizing his strategy had failed, Shino fired his bugs at Utakata in an attempt to drain enough chakra for Sai to place the seal. An explosion of chakra erupted where Yugito was standing, and then Sakura, Neji, and Lee's bruised bodies landed in front of him. Utakata, like Yugito, managed to escape Shino's control and fully transform alongside her. The Konoha 10 heaved a collective sigh of relief when Nagato and Team Hiruzen leapt in front of them, relieving them of their momentary terror. "We'll deal with these two," Nagato said. "The white Zetsu have stopped advancing and all rest inside the village now where the others need your help." The Konoha 10 got it, and they sped off in an effort to put an end to the fighting in their village as soon as possible. Hiruzen said as he and the Sannin prepared for battle, "This brings back some painful memories." The others nodded in agreement to Jiraiya's statement that, "Hi, but this time we come more prepared." Obito's grin, which he had been forced to suppress while watching from the anchor Vantian, was wiped away when he saw a massive explosion take place where Deidara had been fighting the Asura path. Following the Asura road, the Akatsuki may have survived the Asura path's initial attack, but from there on out, it was all downhill. No matter how much damage Deidara dealt to the path, it always seemed to find a way to counter it by changing its body structure. The Mad Bomber became so enraged that he stopped noticing how much clay and chakra he was burning through. After each barrage of clay bombs from Deidara, the path would respond with a salvo from a laser cannon, a flamethrower, or some other invention. But in his wrath, Deidara had had enough of this farce and decided to use his most powerful explosion. CO. Deidara laughed maniacally as he dodged an attack, then removed his cloak to reveal a surgically repaired mouth over his heart. White Zetsu appeared before him and began to engage, and the Asura path knew exactly what was happening and tried to stop him. Deidara, pleased with the support, removed the stitches, stuffed the remaining clay inside the mouth, and allowed it to close. Deidara's body expanded into an enormous ball as she laughed hysterically again. The Asura path resolved its Zetsu issue just as the size began to cause Deidara's body to crack, and it quickly grabbed hold of the Akatsuki member's body before using a shunshin to appear far from the village. As Deidara's body exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the battle temporarily halted before continuing as normal. The explosion flattened a 6-mile radius around the Hokage monument, destroying the forest there. The Asura path escaped the blast, but not before suffering serious injuries. Fortunately, the Naraka path used its powers to heal it back to full strength before disappearing to join Nagato in the battle against the two-controlled Jinchuriki. Having Sasori. The Zetsu army allowed Sasori to slaughter anyone in his way using his Sandame Cage puppet. Those who dared approach him met their end at the end of Hiriko's tail. Sasori was about to add to the blood that was streaming down the streets and splashing across the walls when he caught fire and felt Hiriko's head being severed with a chakra scalpel. After years of hiding, he finally came out of hiding by cursing his way out of the now destroyed body. Nothing was said in response to Sasori's statement that, so the apprentice of Tsunade and the brother of Itachi have come to meet their demise. I see. Maybe I can use some of you quiet types in my collection. As Sasori launched an attack against Sakura and Sasuke using the Sandame Cage's iron sand, the Konoha shinobi surrounding the two shifted their attention to the Zetsu army and thanked them for their help. But as he attacked, Sasori felt the strings loosening on his puppet and something crawling over him. The puppeteer, knowing who these little bugs belonged to, would have scowled if he could. Sasori was undeterred, and he continued his attack on Sasuke and Sakura while also using the iron sand to kill the bugs that had invaded his body. Shino, who had been lurking in the shadows nearby, frowned as he sensed the destruction of his hive, but he wasn't about to give up the fight. A new hive, the Kidaichu, had been established in his body, though it was still in the testing phase. To completely devour Sasori from the inside out, Shino only needed to get a few of them onto him before he could overload them with chakra. The iron sand was still a problem, but it wouldn't be for long. The Aburame made some gestures and prepared his jutsu, having detected the approach of an Inuzuka member. Even though Sakura's chakra scalpels had severed an arm from the K-Cage puppet, Sasori couldn't help but crack an inward grin. He had the upper hand and was about to deliver the killing blow when he noticed Sasuke and Sakura laughing and smiling. Sasori then realized a swamp had opened up beneath him, and he began to quickly sink. Worse yet, the puppet master overheard everything. Sasori was surprised to learn that the target of the attack was not he, but rather the Sandame K-Cage. Sasori felt more bugs crawling over him right before he was going to move the puppet, and they quickly dug into his wooden body and messed with his chakra strings. In a fit of rage over the loss of his most prized puppet, Sasori unsealed a scroll from his back in an attempt to launch his performance of 100 puppets, but Sasuke quickly intervened with a blast of fire, rendering the scroll useless. Here, Sasori realized that Konoha had learned about his techniques and thus was able to soundly defeat him. Sasori of the Red Sands had this final thought as the Kidaichu gnawed on the container containing his heart. Sasuke's smile faded as he heard Lee yell out in pain, but he still managed to say, "Thanks for the help, everyone." However, it seems that our other friends require assistance in dealing with the remaining Akatsuki member. Suddenly, they heard a cracking sound coming from Sasori's dead body, and as they turned to leave, they saw something begin to emerge. They watched the bugs that Shino had planted poke their heads out before exploding, turning Sasori into little more than wood chips. Sasuke yelled, "Damn, Shino!" as he saw his friend approach him and Sakura. To quote one character, "Did you have to be that harsh, he was already dead?" As he adjusted his sunglasses, Shino said, "My apologies." The Kidaichu were becoming increasingly difficult to manage, so they were killed off so that Konoha wouldn't be devoured. A chill ran up their spines at the prospect of those Kidaichu expanding even further than they had already witnessed. Although the Aburame are friendly, the methods of their clan still gave them the creeps. Together with the Jinchuriki, Nagato, and Team Hiruzen. While the Konoha 10 went to deal with Kakuzu, Team Hiruzen and Nagato were engaged in the greatest battle in the history of the world. Both Nagato and his allies were making progress against Utukata, while Team Hiruzen was making progress against Yugito. Tsunade cried out and punched the ground, stopping Yugito's charge, but Orochimaru was able to use his great breakthrough to strike just as Hiruzen released his Fire Dragon Flame Bullet. The improved flames branched off to the left, right, and forward as they moved. Jiraiya followed up with a move he used on Kisame after the white-hot flames pounded the transformed Yugito, but everyone knew Matabi was immune to most fire. Invoking the Destroyer of Food Carts. Gameken appeared in place of the usual massive green toad and sat upon the Jinchuriki, causing it to roar in pain and kick up dust. As soon as Gameken felt whatever he was sitting on shift, he sat back down on Matabi and exclaimed, "Oh dear, how clumsy of me." The Sannin and Hiruzen saw the Jinchuriki rise, so they too activated their sage modes without the aid of their summons and prepared for battle. Matabi shook her head, looked around, and then turned her attention to the people below, which caught everyone by surprise. "Oh, I'm so grateful to you for delaying the effects of the genjutsu Tobi cast upon us so that I could retrieve my container." A short while later, Nagato joined them, indicating that Seiken had also broken free of Toba's hold. "Are you okay, sister?" "I'm doing the best I can, Seiken, but our container's grief is beginning to overwhelm them." Tobi, who was beginning to lose command of the Jinchuriki, ordered the Zero Tails to charge up the Anchor Vantian just as Nagato and Team Hiruzen were about to speak. In no time at all, the superweapon was ready to fire, and a massive beam was aimed at the Hokage monument, which, if struck, would destroy the majority of Konoha. Matabi and Seiken responded quickly, each firing a Bijudama into the air, and the two of them collided mid-air before colliding with the beam that Anchor had shot. The blast was so loud that people had to cover their eyes to avoid being blinded, but it also caused some damage. The shockwave from the explosion, which occurred in the air just outside of Konoha, destroyed many buildings, shattered nearly every window, and further cracked the Hokage monument, causing more chunks to fall off. Even more so after witnessing Kakuzu's death at the hands of the Konoha 10 and the Konoha forces, Obito cursed the attack's failure. He was undeterred, and he ordered the Zero Tails to launch another charge, this time directly at the Jinchuriki he had once commanded. Everyone in Konoha watched in horror as the attack descended towards the ground, poised to kill some of the city's most revered figures. Nagato glanced at Hiruzen, then back at the oncoming attack, and made a decision he usually saved for the most dire circumstances. By drawing on his paths, he created a duplicate that grabbed Hiruzen and the Sannin and ran off before they could raise a fuss. The Biju were able to see their father, the Sage of Six Paths, within Nagato's Rinnegan eyes, as well as his plans for the future. Tell my cousin that I enjoyed our time together and that I'm sorry his heart has to deal with another loss if you see him after today, Nagato said as his chakra expanded. When the Zero Tails launched their attack, the Biju were helpless to stop it, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try to save someone with their father's kind heart. Nagato, sensing the oncoming attack's intensity, channeled his remaining chakra into a single massive Shinra Tensai. The people of Konoha watched in horror as the ground their Godem was standing on trembled and buckled, pushing the attack back toward its point of origin. A second attack from the Anchor Vantian landed on Nagato's previous attempt, and as his veins and muscles puffed out from the effort, he felt his chakra replenish thanks to Matabi and Seiken. Another huge explosion occurred, this time so loud that it muffled everyone's cries and obliterated the front section of Konoha. However, things could have turned out much worse if not for the fact that numerous Earthlings erected a wall to safeguard not only buildings but also human lives. As the smoke cleared, Obito teleported to the scene of the blast via Kamui and saw a nearly lifeless Nagato staring at him with hatred in his eyes as he coughed up blood. When Obito saw an unconscious Yugito and Utakata nearby, he realized that the Biju had thrown themselves in front of the attack just before it exploded, which explained why the Godem had lost none of its limbs. Obito sighed and drew a scroll from his robes, saying, "Poor, poor, Nagato." As in, some kami you turned out to be, nay? Even though Nagato was paralyzed from the waist down after the blast broke his back, his screams continued as Obito removed his eyes, which he had previously used for good, and placed them in a jar of preservation fluid. Nagato's voice was hoarse from screaming, but he said, "You think this is the end? That we will still lie down and admit defeat so easily? No, when Naruto and Shizuka return they will see what destruction you wrought, what you did to their friends, and only then will you experience true fear." Obito questioned, "Fear?" In the words of the new kami, "Please, I am the new kami, and such an emotion has no control over me." Nagato collapsed here, and Obito went to retrieve his pets, but Kakashi, Rikiri fully charged, rushed in, and the Uchiha had to duck. "A former teammate of yours says, now, is that the way you treat one of your old teammates?" Kakashi shot back, his eyes narrowing with anger, "I know what's under that mask of yours." Obito. "That's so sweet that Nagato told you all about me." Kakashi cried out, Why? As his anger dissipated. "Why were you so eager to spread peace rather than war?" Obito snarled, "You damn well know why, Kakashi. Because of you, I've lost the woman I love, but when my plan succeeds, we'll be together again." Kakashi managed to mutter, "She wanted to die, she told me to do it, you don't know." Before being punched in the face and kicked in the stomach. Warning Kakashi, "Don't you spread that bullshit, Kakashi." Obito stomped on the unconscious Kakashi. To paraphrase, "You did it out of spite, I know you did, why else would you kill her? According to you, I killed her to free the three tails, one of which Kiri sealed inside her due to the Mizukage's orders at that time." Obito, who had been prepared to kill Kakashi, refrained after hearing those words from his former teammate, as he could think of only one person who had served as Mizukage in that era. The question arises, was the one in the office just a figurehead? Was Madara the one running the show behind the scenes all along? The oncoming Konoha forces interrupted Obito's thoughts, but his mind was still a jumble of uncertainty and self-doubt. The Uchiha silently reversed the Anchor Vantian with Kamui and sent it racing away. The Konoha army rallied around Godem and the two Jinchuriki, consoling a distraught Kakashi. Although the village of Konoha was spared, many ninja and civilians were killed and much more property damage was done than in the Kyuubi attack. Yet, just as in the past, the village hidden in the leaves would mend and get back to normal. The land of iron. With a frown that had clearly deepened in the time since Naruto had gone to the elemental nations, Mifune entered the hospital. For the past year, Iron Country's leader has been experiencing unusual symptoms, some of which were serious enough to prompt a trip to the doctor.
Mifune paused on his approach to the front desk to cough into the handkerchief he had removed from his kimono.
He sighed as he removed it and saw more blood. Receptionist smiled as she told Mifune, "Mifune-sama, the doctor is ready to see you now." However, Mifune could sense the anxiety in her voice. "Thank you, and don't worry about me. I'll be replaced as leader soon." The doctor was standing in the hall with a clipboard and a frown on his face when you walked in. The speaker said, "Mifune-sama, come with me as you need to be sitting down for this." The leader of the Iron Country nodded, and the two went into the doctor's office together. Once inside, Mifune sat down, and the doctor took a seat next to him. "How bad is it, exactly?" As he began, the doctor sighed, "I'm afraid that the cancer has spread to the point that we can't operate, Mifune-sama, but we do have an experimental drug which might reverse the process." After considering the decision with his calloused hands, Mifune said with a smile, "I see. I appreciate the report, but at this point in my life, I'm at peace with death and don't need the medication." After recovering from his initial shock, the doctor said, "If that is what you wish, Mifune-sama, but please know that you only have about a year to live." "I get it. Appreciate you clearing that up." Afterwards, 6 months. A week after the attack on Konoha, the remaining villages of Iwa, Suna, Aim, Kiri, Snow, and Taki received word. Everyone in those villages worked harder than ever to prepare for the Cage Summit, knowing that whatever lay ahead, it would be a test of their mettle. Speaking of education, Shizuka finished sage training sooner than expected and was rewarded by being sent to Uzu to meet Naruto and observe his development. Naruto, who had also completed his work early, was relieved to be back in her arms. Both had at least cage-level strength, and in some cases even more than that. Naruto has mastered ki to the point where the technique that nearly killed him is now easy for him to use. He also reached a level of mastery in Mu's Jikiden Eishin Ryu where his techniques could be integrated into Hanjo's system. Since he had honed his Aikido skills to the point where he could launch attacks with his feet, hands, and mouth, Naruto had taken to going shoeless. Yuki benefited greatly from her time spent training with Elune. She grew a second tail and became nearly as powerful as the Nibi. Her one-of-a-kind fighting style and mastery of the fire element were both top-notch. It took some practice, but Elune also learned that she could control her size by tapping into a unique chakra. Shizuka's transformation was so effortless thanks to her years of sage training that she was able to maintain it for well over an hour, or longer with the help of her clones. Although the salamander's taijutsu technique was far from perfect, her poisonous breath made her an extremely dangerous foe. Her kusarigama had the same effect, but she was able to pull it out at the drop of a hat thanks to a storage seal hidden beneath a tiny sickle tattoo on her right wrist. Similarly to Naruto and Yuki, she had mastered her elemental affinities to the point where she rarely used hand seals. Even though Shizuka, Naruto, and Yuki had a good time together, they would get a rude awakening when they returned to Konoha. The revelation of Obito's accomplishment would fuel their resolve to reach the peak and destroy the Uchiha for good. After having the Rinnegan implanted in his eyes by Zetsu, Obito was no slouch when it came to training like the rest of his classmates. He forced himself to learn all he could about the Rinnegan, and then, when he was ready, he called upon the King of Hell to restore Kabuto to health.
After regaining consciousness, Kabuto and Zetsu embarked on the implementation of the final phase of his plan, which would guarantee his control over the Jinchuriki, more accurately, the Biju within them.
Today was the day of the Cage Summit, and as Obito finished his training for the day, he couldn't help but smile, but he also found himself thinking back on something Kakashi had said months before. "If what you said, Kakashi, is true, then my vengeance will be for naught. I will be a disgrace in the eyes of everyone, including Rin. Not even Kami would take a tainted soul like I." The Uchiha shook off these thoughts and left the training ground in his hideout to prepare for the main event. Gates to Konoha. When Shizuka, Yuki, and Naruto finally caught sight of Konoha, they were taken aback to see that the village was still undergoing repairs. The Cage Tower, like many other structures, was surrounded by scaffolding, and the Hokage monument was bustling with repairmen. Flying up to get a better look, Naruto closed his eyes in sadness and clenched his fists in anger at what Obito had done. Shizuka greeted him with a light squeeze of his hands as he landed, bringing a smile to Naruto's face. "As the Cage Summit is scheduled to begin later this week, we must decline your kind offer." Shizuka nodded, and the group proceeded into the village, causing numerous people to turn and stare. When the three returned, the defeated and despondent expressions were replaced with cheers and hugs. People were so encouraged by what they heard that they abandoned their tasks to tell others that victory was still possible in this war. Shizuka, Naruto, and Yuki's faces lit up at the sight, but their joy was short-lived because Nagato was waiting for them halfway to the cage tower. When Naruto first saw his cousin's icy blue eyes, he exclaimed, "Cousin, your eyes." Naruto's eyes are normally rimmed in a deep purple. With a sigh, Nagato said, "Hi, Try as I might, Obito still managed to take what made me Kami. He smiled and patted Naruto on the back. It took me a long time to perfect this dojutsu, but you need more than 6 months of training to worry about it. Good to know, Shizuka said, though her expression betrayed some apprehension. But losing that kind of power has to make you weaker in battle, right? False, Shizuka-san, I still remember how to use all the elements, and so I can. However, the sub-elements are beyond my current capabilities. With a nod, Naruto followed the group into the tower and up the stairs to the office. When they were inside, they closed the door and sat down, hoping to relax before the next Shinobi War broke out. Naruto began, training aside, the way Obito has gone about things makes planning all but impossible, which will severely hamper most of our forces. However, knowing you and Shinobi, he continued, I'm sure you have found a way to make order out of the chaos. Nagato leaned back in his chair and said, Hi, correct you as we have set up a command base here where some of the Yamanaka and Nara will be coordinating attack plans once this war kicks off. And say this command outpost is destroyed. If any of the remaining villages are destroyed, what then? Laughing, Nagato said to his cousin, my cousin, you should know by now that shinobi never fight fair. Shizuka and Naruto mimicked his smirk. There was a pause before I continued, we'll find a way, you needn't worry. The Cage Summit, now. Time jump. Iron Country, Day 4. Traveling to Iron Country took most of the time, but the remaining village leaders are now gathered in the same council chambers that Naruto was in when the Civil War broke out. Kuretsuchi and her guards Han and Roshi were there to represent Iwa. Mei Terumi, accompanied by her bodyguards Zabuza and Haku, acted as representatives for Kiri. Nagato and his guards Naruto and Shizuka stood in for Konoha. In addition to Konan, Aim was accompanied by her bodyguards Yugito and Utakata, news of whose release from Obito's custody brought joy to Naruto and Shizuka. The former Raikage, and the other Jinchuriki were stationed in and around the surviving villages to serve as guards and deterrents. However, Obito had a history of attacking at will, so this measure was taken more out of caution. Now that the leaders and guards were safely inside, discussions began about the upcoming battles and the impact this war would have on the elemental nations as a whole. When Mifune, dressed in the white ceremonial armor rather than his usual green Civil War armor, entered the room, all conversation came to an abrupt halt. Naruto understood the significance of this armor and shot an apologetic glance in Mifune's direction. That aura is in the air again, Kurama. It looks like I'll lose another one today. Kurama's reply was a somber, so it seems, Kit. Please accept my condolences and future good wishes. I appreciate it, but today is not a day of celebration. Rather, it is a day of preparation. Mifune sat down and shakily said, I thank you all for attending, his gaunt face leaving onlookers wondering what had become of the once powerful samurai. In light of my deteriorating health, however, I'd like to keep things brief. Let the second Cage Summit begin. At first, no one said a word because everyone was already on the same page about working together to take down Obito. Mei Terumi stared down the Uzumaki and addressed him as Nagato-san. I appreciate your offering Konoha as central command, but are you absolutely positive that you'll be ready for the responsibility? Hi, even though Obito took my Rinnegan and he dealt quite a bit of damage to Konoha, Nagato replied with a smile on his face, I assure you that we are indeed ready to commit fully to this war. That's interesting, but if I may ask, what are the Rinnegan's abilities and why does Obito need them? Cousin, if you will? Nagato asked as he turned his attention to Naruto, who was standing to his right. Of course, but I ask that you respect my privacy as I speak. What Obito has in mind is much more dire than you may realize. Naruto then spent the next 5 minutes explaining in detail where the Rinnegan came from and how the Sage of Six Paths came to possess them. To continue, Naruto detailed the origin of the 9 Biju and reaffirmed that their original purpose was to protect the land, but that Hashirama ruined that by distributing them to different villages to be sealed and eventually used as weapons. After asking his cousin for permission to continue, which he received with a nod of the head, Naruto explained, this creature called Jubi, is what Obito is after and why he needs the Rinnegan in the first place. Being the eyes of the sage, they hold not only infinite power but also great responsibility. Among these responsibilities is preventing the return of the Jubi to power. However, in the wrong hands, they could be used to summon the husk of the 10 tails and seal the 9 Biju into it, releasing the beast to once again roam these lands. Kuretsuchi asked, if that's the case, then shouldn't we avoid bringing the Jinchuriki into this battle at all costs? He was met with glares. The speaker finally conceded, okay, I get it, not the best idea. As Han pointed out, all of us may be able to change into our Biju at will, but it's only thanks to them agreeing to help us. Roshi asked, hi, but on a precautionary note, in case the worst does happen and Obito someone managed to master most of the Rinnegan in these 6 months, what happens if our Biju do become unsealed? This prompted a humming of thoughts from the group, which was interrupted when Naruto placed a blue stone on the table. Mifune asked, is that runic? Before coughing. Naruto nodded and picked up the stone once more, saying, hi, Mifune Dono. I won't tell you what this stone does, but if the worst does happen, I have a way to counter it. Han, Roshi, Yugito, and Utakata all said at once, that stone. By Kami, what it does. As their Biju filled them in on its capabilities. Utakata spoke in his usual monotone, but he cracked a gentle smile to make sure that Naruto-san was doing fine before continuing. I can see why you hold it then, Naruto-san. As she straightened the flower in her hair, Konan said, now that we know a little of the history, perhaps now would be the best time to discuss battle plans. Obito, his head cocked to one side in naive to copyright, appeared from a kamui just as they were about to enter the room. As everyone got into fighting formation, the Uchiha asked, I'm not interrupting anything, am I? His Rinnegan eyes glowed under the mask. There won't be any fighting between you and me because I'm just a messenger. Kuretsuchi's response of calling bullshit caused everyone to laugh, except for the unexpected guest. Before he unleashed a Shinra Tensai, Obito mumbled, not in a joking mood it seems. The terrified onlookers could only watch in horror as the council room was blown to shreds and its occupants were blasted outside. When everyone at the Cage Summit had gotten to their feet, they went back to their original positions just as Obito emerged from the debris. The Uchiha grinned behind his mask as he said, 13 against 1? Now that hardly seems fair. But then again, who cares, I am, after all, a soon-to-be kami where all will grovel at my feet. And here I was thinking I wasn't so bad, Nagato said to Konan. The speaker reflected, I wasn't that bad, was I? To which the other responds, hell no, you were tame compared to this pompous ass before me. Obito's right eye twitched in response to the remark, and he stomped his foot angrily, hoping to create a field of earth spikes to impale his attackers. Unfortunately, Shizuka used her earth element mastery to halt the attack and channel the shaped chakra into her earth jutsu, Gaia's Wrath, one of her most prized techniques. As Obito watched a maw emerge from the ground and shoot spikes in his direction, he complained, well, that's not fair at all. Naruto appeared next to Obito in a flash of yellow and attempted an upward slash with an Hanjo infused with ki from the wind and fire. Using the Asura path, Obito made his skin as hard as steel in the hopes of protecting himself, but the Hanjo was designed to slash through anything. As a result, Obito was taken aback to find himself gasping for air and clinging to the severed limb on his right side. The fire ki is cauterizing the wounds. Obito, furious at having to deal with yet another thorn in his side, made a beeline for Naruto, but was quickly blown away by one of Utakata's explosive bubbles and then doused in an acidic mist by Mei. Obito finally snapped and unleashed another Shinra Tensai, but it was stopped when Shizuka unexpectedly raised a solid steel wall. Due to the complexity of the earth element, such a thing was rarely seen. Obito, however, took advantage of the diversion by calling upon the King of Hell before throwing himself inside and emerging moments later with his arm and wounds completely healed. Kuretsuchi sighed, and we're back to square one, just great. Have any brilliant suggestions? Mifune said to Naruto as he stood next to the young man, just one. Saddened, Naruto asked, does it have to be today, Mifune Dono? But he saw resignation in the old man's eyes, and he knew that Mifune had accepted his fate. Mifune sighed as he watched the others begin fighting Obito again and said, cancer struck me not long after you left, Uzumaki-san, and I have but a few short months to live. I've had a good life, but I think it's time for me to be reconnected with my loved ones and former students. Naruto, sensing the gravity of the situation, knelt down until his forehead was resting on the cold pavement. Mifune joyfully unsheathed his katana and issued his order as onlookers gathered around the combatants. Mifune tapped his katana on Naruto's shoulders and placed it under his chin to make him rise, then said, to those in attendance today, know that I, Mifune, hereby relinquish my role as leader of Iron Country and hereby instate Naruto Uzumaki Harumasa as the inheritor of my will, and my title as leader of this great country. All hail the new leader, all hail General Harumasa. Stand now, Harumasa-san, and assume the responsibilities that you have earned. Stand now, Harumasa-san, so that you may lead this nation to the greatness of those who came before you, and perhaps to new horizons. Obito was trying to silence the celebratory chants of "Hail, hail, hail" from those around him. The Uchiha shunshined right in front of Naruto in an attempt to grab him and take him for extraction after finally shaking off his opponents with another Shinra Tensai, but the opposite happened. Mifune, on the other hand, had anticipated the situation and acted accordingly as Obito arrived. The Uchiha was pierced in the stomach by Mifune's blade because he had lost his M's and could no longer turn intangible. Obito stumbled backwards, coughing up blood, but Mifune was not finished. He bear-hugged the Uchiha and began to spike his ki. But he held back, allowing the pressure to mount. When Naruto and the others first felt it, they didn't expect Mifune to go this far. Naruto, anticipating the inevitable, yelled, "No, not like this, Mifune Dono. Don't let it out like this." Mifune turned around and frowned at Naruto's tears. "Dry your tears, Harumasa-san, for I wish to go out this way, but promise me that my sacrifice won't be in vain, promise me that you will lead this village to the best of your ability." As Mifune's ki spiked again and Obito was about to break from the hold, Naruto wiped away his tears and said, "Hi, I promise. To die by the blade is the ultimate honor for a samurai, so Mifune Dono, please forgive me for what I am about to do." With his wakizashi unsheathed, Naruto approached Mifune, who anticipated his next move. The former leader of Iron Country nodded in agreement and closed his eyes as the blade pierced his heart and Obito's. Mifune's final words were spoken as the ki he was holding inside exploded, leaving the Uchiha spitting out blood and staring blankly at the ground. Yes, this has been a fine death.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.